I'm bringing out the big guns here, little Annie, because video game developer Cliff Bleszinski has indirectly confirmed that Get Woke, Go Broke is real in the video game industry. Or, well, at least the video game journalists are reacting as if exactly what he said was this. And it's awfully telling that all the smears were out within minutes of an Instagram post about from Cliff Bleszinski over the failure of his Lawbreakers game. There's countless articles. One of the most ridiculous from the human egg Kirk McKeon. Let's take a look, because we all know I love Get Woke, Go Broke. And watching all of these developers, game journals freak out is unbelievable. I'm just going to pull up something here quick. Yep. Okay, here we go. Sorry, doing this on the fly. We can just look at Forbes. Cliff Bleszinski blames the failure of Lawbreakers on politics and gender-neutral bathrooms. PC Gamer. Cliff Bleszinski says Lawbreakers failed because he was, quote, too political. GameSpot. Cliff Bleszinski says he made Lawbreakers too woke. Vice. Does Cliff Bleszinski understand why Lawbreakers failed? VG247. Lawbreakers failed because it was too woke, says Cliff Bleszinski. Screen Rant. Cliff Bleszinski blames woke politics in Lawbreakers for game's failure. Video Gamer. Cliff Bleszinski attributes wokeness to the failure of Lawbreakers. PC Games. And I mean, methinks thou doth protest too much. Now, of course, the game didn't fail because it was too woke. The game failed because it launched late into an oversaturated market of games that existed at the time. But also, Cliff Bleszinski did not say that's exactly why the game failed, and he's come out swinging. If you look at some of his replies here to these articles, because you could tell he's obviously very angry. Over the years, websites knew this and have willfully played along, twisting my words from interviews. Example, I love Kojima and his games, but the cutscenes can be a bit long. Becomes Bleszinski slams Kojima. Step 3, click profit. Back to writing in Broadway. Ultimately, you see a lot of replies here. I said, here's replying to Game Revolution. I said it was a reason. F off with the clickbait already. Everybody is just so desperate to protect their wokeness. When the news stories about your game are that it has gender-neutral bathrooms, you're not doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. If one wants to put that stuff in their game, fine. Just don't brag about it online and to the media. That was a mistake, and this is me owning this. It started off by him saying, sigh. I made a post on my Instagram saying that I believe my putting my personal politics first was a factor in the game not taking off. And now the clickbait articles have hit. Bleszinski blames politics for LB tanking. And on and on and on and on. There's a chunk of the internet and gamers that no matter what I say or do or have done are determined to hate my guts and twist my words into something they can spew vitriol over until the end of time. Ultimately, there were other factors for the failure, marketing among them. But I was being open and honest about believing that was a factor and a mistake on my part, and this is what happens. Now, you could honestly argue, Overwatch is pretty woke, and it hasn't really affected that game from taking a big chunk of the market. But there are other games that, aren't exactly what I would call woke. Look at Forbes. Cliff Bleszinski blames the failure of Lawbreakers on politics and gender-neutral bathrooms. Cliffy B, formerly of Gears of War Epic fame, has posted his regrets about a failed game Lawbreakers on Instagram. The post makes no mention of the poor marketing the game received, or in fact that it was a fairly generic shooter whose heroes made painfully awkward catchphrases. Instead, Bleszinski talks about politics. It was his insertion of, quote, woke politics into the game that turned people off, he argues. One big epiphany I had that pushed my own personal politics in a world that was increasingly divided, he continues. Instead of the story being this game looks neat, it became this game with the woke bro trying to push his hackery politics on us with gender-neutral bathrooms. Instead of these characters seem fun, it was the studio with the CEO who refuses to make his female characters look better. Instead of, who am I going to choose? It became white dude shoehorns diversity in his game, then smells his own smug farts in interviews, instead of just letting the product speak for itself. I'm not sure about you, but I don't remember any hacky politics in Lawbreakers, let alone gender-neutral bathrooms. Were there bathrooms in the game? I guess a few times I played, I was too busy to notice. Did you really not try to make the characters look too attractive? Well, that's one's true enough. They're all in armor, and none of them are running around in thongs, etc. But again, that's not something I ever considered while playing the game. Lawbreakers had plenty of problems. It wasn't as good as Overwatch, a game which had mostly dominated this category since launch. It came out right as PUBG and Fortnite were taking the world by storm, which is why Boss Key rushed Radical Heights out the door, half-baked and half-conceptualized, though potentially fun with more. This, more than anything, it wasn't very fun. It was okay at best. It needed to be better. Honestly, there just wasn't a market for it. I think interest in these type of games was vastly overblown, and companies like Boss Key and even Treyarch, which took Call of Duty way too far in that direction, were suckered into it. Meanwhile, nobody was leaving Battle Royale games or Overwatch to play Lawbreakers. Partly, that's bad timing. Partly, that's bad execution. Very, very little blame can be shouldered by the game's political messaging, and it's an online competitive game, for goodness sake. There was hardly a storyline to follow. Well, you could argue that, but we know that the game's journalism media has, endlessly found ways to make the narrative about that. I'll tell you this. Why is the media reacting with such vitriol? Why is the game's journalism media working so fastidiously to debunk this? Because there's truth to it. Because there's truth to that statement. Now, I'm going to actually pull up Cliff's actual statement here because it's quite different when we look at this. Hung it in the garage. Ironic, the sign kind of got messed up in transport, ain't it? Ever since the studio closed, I've been racking my brain what I could have done differently. Pivot hard when the juggernaut of Overwatch was announced. Been less nice with my design ideas and more of a dictator with them. One big epiphany I had was that I pushed my own personal politics and beliefs into a world that was increasingly divided. Now, let me be very clear. He says in his opening statement here, he needed to pivot hard because he couldn't outdo Overwatch. And then he just said, instead of the story being this game looks neat, it became this game with the woke bro trying to push hack key politics in gender-neutral bathrooms instead of these characters seem fun. So they took just one section of it. He goes on to say, it's okay to be political when your company or studio is established for a great product first, but when we were unproven, I do regret doing it. This will be quite the doozy of a chapter in my upcoming memoir. Now, if we look at probably the worst take coming out of VG 24/7, because Kirk knew we were coming. Kirk knew I was going to cover this. Why? Because when we look at the bottom of the article, he goes, no doubt this post will empower the get woke, go broke crowd. And that's clearly the plan here. Now, of course, in this article, which they also stealth edited, so they made edits to it, but didn't announce that. Be honest with yourself. When you think of Lawbreakers, the debut game from Gears of War creator Cliff Bleszinski's now defunct studio, what do you remember? For me, I remember a very generic-looking game that had a man in it who could shoot backwards. I also remember the reason it was called Lawbreakers wasn't because you went around breaking the law, but because it was a game where one played as the law, one team played as breakers. Clearly, this was the height of creativity. The game was crushed under the weight of Fortnite and Battle Royale craze, so much so that the studio Boss Key made a clumsy pivot to the genre and released an unfinished Battle Royale game in Radical Heights. It wasn't radical, and it certainly wasn't a high point for anyone. It was badical. Awesome writing, Kirk McKeon. Now Cliff Bleszinski, a grown man who calls him Dude Huge, presumably because of his massive effing ego, is reflecting on the performance of his studio and subsequent closure. The real problem, it was woke and it didn't have enough Cliff Bleszinski in it. Again, this is a disingenuous reduction of what he actually said. He definitely said that you know, the game didn't stand out against Overwatch and other things, but he dared to mention that people don't like woke politics, and now everyone's over correcting to try and squash that. Then he put part of his statement here, of course. And it goes on to say, won't somebody think of the gamer boners? Please, someone, my boner is dying. No doubt this will empower the Get Woke Go Broke crowd, and that's clearly the plan here. Why mention the upcoming book if that isn't a misguided attempt at promoting it? Well, if the past 10 years have taught us anything, dude huge, it's the people who want this crowd as their fan base ultimately are the ones who have to live with them. Enjoy it. Well, the Get Woke Go Broke crowd, I would say, has significantly more money to spend, and they're more loyal. So if he is in fact recruiting, it's probably a good crowd. Now, Kirk McKeon stood so strongly in his take that not only did VG247 delete their tweet, but he has hid from Twitter. Preemptive self-care activated, pre-logging off. He goes on to say, I love how dudes like this announce they're unfollowing anyone, like anyone gives an F what they think about. Of course, replying to VG247 saying, no one is stopping non-white males from becoming game developers. Sick of this forced diversity and hatred towards men. Guess I'm done following VG247. You know, for a guy who doesn't care, he took a second to take a screenshot and then post it. Also, just saw Cliffy B said he thinks Lawbreaker fails because it was too woke. This kind of dumbness you're empowering. Good one. You could see Lawbreakers failed because, you know, obviously all these other reasons. Now, obviously, I know that the game didn't fail because of its wokeness, but that's not what he was implying. And also, why did Kirk why did VG247 delete this tweet? A thing that in the Cliffy B quote that bothers me as much as the woke stuff is how he basically says the game would have been better if he had been more of a dictator. Way to undermine the talented team that lost their jobs. Well, that's one way of interpreting that. Another way to interpret that would be to say that, you know, he wasn't confident in his design choices. Maybe he knew that they needed to make these changes sooner, but he didn't follow up. And then before I made my video, because he knew he needed to hide, preemptive self-care activated, logging off. Look, this game failed for a variety of reasons. I don't remember a big pushback against Cliffy B's wokeness or the wokeness in the game, but the reason, make no mistake about it, the reason game journals have written endless articles about that is because they know that there's truth in what he's saying and they're scrambling to discredit him. Make sure you share this video around. Let the media know we are watching and we support Get Woke, Go Broke. Apparently, like Cliffy B does. Hope you enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you again real soon.